There comes a point in life when everything looks calm on the surface, yet something inside begins to ache, a quiet unease that no comfort seems to cure. You have everything you once wanted: stability, familiarity, the quiet assurance that tomorrow will look like today. And still, an invisible question stirs beneath it all. Is this really living, or merely existing? We spend so much of our lives protecting our sense of safety that we forget how easily safety becomes a cage. The comfort zone, once a refuge, slowly turns into a place where curiosity dies in silence. This is not a call to chaos, it's a call to awareness. Because the moment you begin to ask deeper questions, you begin to wake from the trance of repetition. This is the journey we're about to take, the comfort zone trap. Why we fear asking deeper questions. Comfort feels like peace until you listen closely. Then you notice it hums with a quiet tension, the same melody every day, predictable, unchanging, safe. You wake up at the same hour, drink the same coffee, scroll through the same feed. Nothing hurts here. Nothing challenges you either. The human brain loves that. It's built to keep you alive, not to make you free. Dopamine rewards what's familiar. Cortisol punishes what feels uncertain. That's biology's ancient contract with fear. Avoid change, survive longer. And so, most people confuse predictability with peace. They call it stability, but it's only stillness because nothing dares to move. Comfort zones are like softly lit cages, beautifully arranged, gently padded, and entirely self-imposed. You tell yourself you're resting, but what you're really doing is rehearsing safety. Because the mind, conditioned by evolution, mistrusts anything that threatens the known. Novelty triggers the same chemical alarm once used to detect predators. The irony is, in the modern world, it's not tigers that scare us. It's possibilities. New jobs, new cities, new identities. We call it anxiety. But underneath it's ancient biology whispering, "Stay where you are." You've survived here before civilization has perfected this whisper. It teaches you that stability is virtue. It rewards the man who endures the same routine for decades, who mistakes loyalty to habit for discipline. It praises the woman who never questions the script she inherited, calling her grounded and reliable. We are raised not to explore, but to conform, to find a pattern and repeat it until it replaces our sense of self. Comfort becomes culture, and culture becomes camouflage for fear. But comfort is not neutral. It has a slow poison. It dulls the imagination, numbs the hunger for discovery, and makes you believe that stillness equals serenity. Yet deep down, something resists. A restlessness you can't explain, an inner pulse that remembers what aliveness once felt like. You feel it in quiet moments, that strange awareness that peace shouldn't feel this empty. That maybe what you've called balance is just the absence of growth. Neuroscience shows that the brain thrives on challenge. New experiences literally forge new neural pathways. The unfamiliar, once feared, is the very substance of evolution. But when fear dominates the circuitry, the mind loops inside itself, rewarding repetition, punishing expansion. And slowly, without noticing, comfort begins to feel like identity. You start saying, "This is just who I am," when what you really mean is, "This is as far as I dared to go." There's a peculiar tragedy in this. We end up defending the walls that imprison us. We justify our limitations as reason. We call caution wisdom when it's often disguised fatigue. And what we fear losing is not peace, but predictability. Because if the structure collapses, we might have to face the silence underneath. The silence that asks questions we've avoided for years. And that is where the comfort zone reveals its true nature. not as safety, but as avoidance. Because the moment you let quietness deepen, it starts to echo with questions like, am I really happy? What do I actually want? Questions that fracture the illusion of stability. And that brings us to the next step, the fear beneath the questions. If this content is resonating with you, consider subscribing. I make videos that help you see the world and yourself more clearly. Thank you. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the mind begins to stir against its own comfort. It starts with a simple question that feels heavier than it should. Is this it? The words hang in the air, but something deeper trembles beneath them. Because the question isn't really about life, it's about identity. To ask it is to risk dismantling the story you've built around who you think you are. The routines, the roles, the quiet agreements with yourself and others, all of them form a delicate architecture of meaning. To question them feels dangerous because the collapse of that structure doesn't just threaten your plans, it threatens your sense of self. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the tension that arises when reality contradicts belief. The brain, wired for coherence, rushes to defend the old narrative. It produces excuses, rationalizations, distractions. I'm just tired, you say. Things will feel different later. But they don't, because what's trembling underneath is not fatigue, it's awakening. The ego, built over years of repetition and reinforcement, begins to sense its own fragility. It resists not out of malice, but survival. Its primary function is to preserve continuity, to protect you from psychological death. Every deeper question becomes a threat because it demands change, and change feels like annihilation. Carl Jung once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. He wasn't accusing, he was observing. The psyche hides from its own depths because within those depths lies chaos, the shadow, as Jung called it. All the unacknowledged desires, fears, and contradictions we've repressed to appear consistent, acceptable, good. To look into that darkness is to confront the uncomfortable truth that we are not who we pretend to be. And so the mind averts its gaze. It distracts itself with busyness, with explanations, with certainty. It mistakes analysis for understanding. Neuroscience quietly agrees. When people are confronted with information that threatens their beliefs, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, activates as if facing physical danger. The body prepares to fight, flee, or freeze, not from a predator, but from an idea. The self-defensive instinct extends inward. We don't argue against others as much as we argue against the parts of ourselves we're not ready to see. This is why deeper questions, am I fulfilled? Do I love what I've become? Are often left unanswered. They don't just seek truth, they dismantle illusion. But here lies the paradox. The more we avoid these questions, the more restless we become. The very act of suppression drains energy. The unconscious, denied, and unintegrated begins to speak through symptoms, anxiety, irritability, a vague dissatisfaction with everything that once felt enough. The psyche doesn't punish, it calls. The unease we label as crisis is often the soul's attempt to be heard. There is courage required in listening, a quiet, unglamorous courage. It doesn't roar, it whispers. It sits with discomfort long enough to see what hides behind it. Because fear, when observed, begins to reveal its true form, not a wall but a doorway, a passage toward wholeness. And yet for many, the price of honesty feels too high. It's easier to maintain the illusion than to face the emptiness behind it. But illusions, like all fragile things, eventually break under the weight of silence. And what's left, when the facade begins to crack, is something we rarely speak of. The quiet erosion that comes from staying too comfortable for too long. That is what we'll explore next, the cost of staying comfortable. There is a quiet suffering that comes not from chaos, but from repetition. A life so familiar that it no longer demands awareness. You rise, perform, and return. The same actions, the same thoughts, the same faint satisfaction that fades before nightfall. It doesn't hurt, not in the way heartbreak or loss hurts, but it drains something subtler, vitality. Over time, this silent routine becomes a kind of anesthesia, numbing the pulse of existence itself. The mind, deprived of novelty, begins to dull. The heart, denied depth, begins to forget what it once desired. Comfort has done its job too well. Psychology calls this hedonic adaptation, the human tendency to return to emotional baseline no matter what changes occur. The promotion, the new house, the stability, they soothe for a while until familiarity turns even joy into background noise. And when that happens, meaning begins to erode. Because meaning is not found in what repeats, it lives in what transforms. Viktor Frankl, a man who studied despair from within its darkest context, wrote that what humans need is not a life without tension, but a tension toward something, a purpose that stretches them beyond the self. Remove that tension, and the spirit collapses into apathy. Modern life has mistaken comfort for progress. Everything is designed to remove friction, convenience, efficiency, immediacy. Yet every removal of friction also removes an opportunity for engagement. When existence becomes too easy, the psyche begins to atrophy. The muscles of attention weaken. The ability to wonder fades. The philosopher Erich Fromm once said that modern man is well-fed, well-entertained, and spiritually starving. He was not condemning abundance, only the emptiness that comes when abundance replaces aliveness. Neuroscience reflects the same truth. The brain's neuroplasticity, its ability to grow and adapt, depends on challenge, novelty, and discomfort. Without them, neural connections weaken. Even memory dulls when there is nothing new to remember. Stagnation, then, is not just emotional, it is biological. A comfortable mind is a conserving mind, and conservation is the prelude to decline. The organism survives, yes, but it ceases to evolve. And in that stillness grows something more corrosive than fear, indifference. A quiet detachment that masquerades as peace, but feels like a slow vanishing. People describe it as burnout, boredom, or emptiness. But beneath those words is a simpler truth. The soul has grown hungry, and nothing within the comfort zone can feed it anymore. This hunger is not a flaw. It is life's rebellion against sedation. Every creature, every cell, carries within it an impulse toward expansion. To suppress it is to resist the very rhythm that sustains existence. That's why comfort never satisfies for long. It promises rest, but delivers disconnection. It offers safety, but takes vitality as payment. There's a quiet tragedy in realizing this too late. When years of unspoken dissatisfaction harden into cynicism, when curiosity fades into nostalgia. But there is also redemption in recognizing it now. Because beneath the fatigue, beneath the numbness, something still stirs. The same impulse that once led the first human to look beyond the firelight and wonder what lay in the dark. That instinct has not died, it only sleeps beneath routine. To awaken it, one must cross a thin but sacred boundary, the threshold between what is known and what is possible. It is not an act of defiance, but of remembrance. For life was never meant to be safe, it was meant to be alive. And that journey begins with the smallest act of courage, a single step beyond the line. Which leads us to the final chapter, stepping beyond the line. Growth begins not with grand gestures, but with the smallest tremor of uncertainty. The moment when familiarity no longer feels like peace and safety begins to suffocate. To step beyond the line is not to abandon comfort entirely, but to expand it, to stretch the boundary of what the self believes it can endure. It is not a rebellion against stability, but a quiet alliance with life's deeper rhythm, adaptation. Because every living thing, from the smallest cell to the human spirit, evolves only when exposed to uncertainty. Neuroscience reveals something extraordinary about this. Each time the brain encounters novelty, it rewires itself. New neural connections form, and old pathways weaken. This is the architecture of growth. Discomfort sculpting the mind into something more resilient, more alive. The same process that builds endurance in muscles builds clarity in consciousness. The unfamiliar does not destroy stability, it strengthens it. But it must first unsettle it. And that is why the threshold of change always feels like fear, because fear and transformation share the same doorway. There is a strange poetry in that. What we call fear is often the body's signal that evolution is near. The heart races, the pulse quickens, the breath shortens, not as a warning, but as preparation. The nervous system is mobilizing energy for expansion. Modern psychology calls this adaptive stress, the delicate tension between what is and what could be. When met with awareness, it becomes creation. When avoided, it becomes decay. Yet stepping beyond the line does not mean constant upheaval. It means choosing curiosity over certainty, asking even when the answer might rearrange you. It means tolerating the ache of not knowing long enough for wisdom to emerge. It means replacing the question, "What if I fail?" with "What if I evolve?" Because failure in truth is only feedback, the brain learning through error, the soul finding its edge. To live this way is to walk with both humility and courage. The humility to admit that the map is incomplete, and the courage to keep walking anyway. There will be moments of disorientation, moments where the familiar self dissolves. But beneath that disintegration lies emergence. Just as stars are born from collapsing dust, new consciousness arises from the ruins of the old. Carl Jung once wrote that, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Stepping beyond the line is precisely that, not chasing light, but integrating shadow. The unknown is not the enemy. It is the mirror where forgotten parts of the self await recognition. And when you meet them without judgment, something remarkable happens. The fear loses its authority. The comfort zone doesn't vanish, it expands. What once felt impossible becomes the new normal. Growth is not a single leap, but a series of subtle widenings, the gradual realization that the world and the self within it were never as limited as they seemed. Perhaps that is the quiet secret of all transformation. You do not escape your comfort zone. You outgrow it. You turn its walls into thresholds. You learn to live not in perpetual struggle, but in continuous unfolding. If this reflection stirred something within you, if it reminded you of a question you've long avoided or a dream you've quietly postponed, let that be your first step beyond the line. Share what resonated with you in the comments, not as agreement, but as continuation. Because each word you leave might awaken someone else who stands on their own edge. And if this journey spoke to you, leave a like, share it forward. Small acts of connection that carry the same spirit as growth itself. One step, then another, then another. For in the end, asking deeper questions is not rebellion against life. It is an act of reverence toward it. a recognition that peace is not found in avoiding the unknown, but in walking toward it, with open eyes, steady breath, and the quiet knowing that every step beyond the line is, in truth, a step toward yourself.